Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the hour.
We are Seraphim. We are Generation Space, proud investors of the Seraphim 100. Our portfolio and alumni incorporate 100 of the world's leading space tech companies. These companies have collectively raised $2.2 billion in equity funding, with an enterprise value of more than $10 billion. These world-changing companies are already underpinning our everyday lives, generating $1 trillion market opportunity. Since 2016, the portfolio has grown at an unprecedented speed, with new investment records reached every year. Companies from all stages of the ecosystem, from seed to growth. Space investment is now truly global, and the portfolio reflects this geodiversity. The Seraphim 100 incorporates transformative space companies in every aspect of the space sector, disrupting every industry on our planet. These companies are building solutions to solve humanity's greatest challenges. The pioneering 100 represent only the beginning of a thriving ecosystem, building together a more sustainable future on Earth.
Ignition.
And in space.
Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the hour.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Seraphim live webinar. Today we're here to talk about the Seraphim 100. You may have seen us talking about this on socials. We've been celebrating the 100 plus world-changing space tech companies that are in the Seraphim ecosystem and the changing space tech investor landscape. It was 2016 when Seraphim launched the world's first venture fund focused on space, followed by the world's first dedicated space tech accelerator in 2017, and then following that, an oversubscribed IPO of 250 million in 2021 launched the first world's publicly listed growth fund, the Seraphim Space Investment Trust. In this short period of time, the Seraphim portfolio has grown, with companies covering almost every aspect of the space tech ecosystem. The 100 companies supported by Seraphim have collectively raised 2.2 billion in equity funding, with an enterprise value of more than 10 billion. So let's take a deeper dive into this period, and you're going to meet some of our investment team today. Today I'm joined by Seraphim investors, Dr. Maureen Haverty. Hi, Maureen.
Yeah, hi everyone.
And I'm Zainab Kasim. I'll be going through some of the questions today with them, and we'd love to take some questions from the audience as we go at the end. Hi, Zainab.
Hiya.
Thank you both for joining me today. So I'll get straight to the questions. Maureen, I'll go to you first. As I said earlier, the Seraphim 100 encompasses every sector of the space tech ecosystem. What have been the key areas of interest for Seraphim since 2016, and why?
So about half of our portfolio is upstream. So that's basically everything in space, going to space or helping something get to space. And we believe, and that is the key enabling technology for the rest of the ecosystem. You can't have any other companies unless there are companies producing data in space or communicating in space or anything like that. Then we have 30%. So that's why we tilt more that way. 30% downstream, so they're all the companies using all the great data made in space or leveraging that technology. That's starting to grow because more and more of these companies are coming online. So we see more people who are building products using space data. And then finally, we're 20% in space economy. So that's things like space stations, orbital tug vehicles, space data relay. That there's some of the examples of the in-space economy, and really that's starting to take off as the space sector matures, as people can do bigger and more ambitious things, particularly as the cost of launch comes down, the cost of doing business in space comes down. So they're the three key areas.
I didn't hear Leah.
Sorry, I was muted there. So go over to you. And what key areas are we looking at right now and in the future?
Yeah, so I think, like Maureen said, only 20% of previous investment was dedicated to sort of the Beyond Earth segment. And so now we're starting to build on that and increase on that a little bit more. So we did a recent investment into KST, which is a free fly and return vehicle. And then also moving forward, we're looking more into the in-orbit economy. So this is companies that are leveraging the infrastructure that's already been set in space, and then are using that to then design and do R&D of materials, and then also drug discovery and life sciences. So they're really, finding novel things to create in a microgravity environment. And yeah, that's got some really, really large downstream terrestrial markets in healthcare and life sciences. So it's all very sort of a lot more bolder investments into the in-orbit economy.
Fascinating stuff. I think that's why what a lot of people didn't realise that we were doing. And what about your work with the accelerator, Zainab? What companies from the alumni are really standing out to you right now?
I think one of the ones most recently has been New Orbit. So they're doing something really exciting around air breathing propulsion, and they've developed the first sort of air breathing engine to essentially fly satellites in VLEO. And so they're testing that by the end of the year. And if all goes well, they'll be the first company in the world to have designed this technology. And I think more recently, we've had a company called Virtuous Solace on the most recent accelerator program, who are doing space-based solar. And that's really exciting because I think that's something that a lot of people thought was really, far-fetched and in the future. These are really capital-intensive businesses, and there's sort of a lot of tech risk around it. But they sort of teams coming together, and we're seeing how they're executing on it.
So I think that's one of the amazing things about the accelerator is that you guys are just tracking all of these companies from the alumni from Mission 1 up to now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maureen, what about the breakdown of the Seraphim 100 in terms of stage and investment, and how it's developed over the last few years and as the space tech continues to develop?
Yeah, so I'm sure people are aware at this stage, if you watched a few of these, we can invest in everything from seed up to pre-IPO, and then through the accelerator, we can invest in seed state, pre-seed companies. So because we have this accelerator, we have a number of cohorts per year. The actual Seraphim 100 skews a little bit towards some of these earlier stage companies. But one of the really gratifying things is, as you mentioned, we're tracking companies from Mission 1. We have companies that we've invested in right from the start, and are continuing to follow on and invest. And also we've got companies who maybe we didn't invest in when they originally did the cohort, and now they're kind of coming back to us and doing their Series B. So they're maturing as we're maturing and as the sector is maturing. As many people know, we have our Seraphim Space Investment Trust, which is listed on the London Stock Exchange, and that vehicle is designed for us to invest in everything from Series B up to pre-IPO. So we're doing more and more growth. And then I think at the moment we're seeing, and I think as Zainab has mentioned, we're seeing a lot of earlier stage companies operating in some really quite exciting areas. So I'm sure you'll see some more early stage investing from us as well.
Great, thank you, Maureen. And what about geography? Where are we seeing this split, and what territories are growing?
So we're about 60% based in Europe. Again, that's a little bit because of our tilt that we have because of the accelerator program. Most of the cohorts were run out of London, and it was just easier for European companies to participate. But throughout the portfolio, in terms of companies that we're investing in out of SSIT, for example, we have 4 in Tel Aviv. So Tel Aviv is probably our most active city. So that's exciting. And then we're about 30% in North America and 7% in Asia. So we always wanted to be international. We're a global investor, and the accelerator that we now have in San Francisco, I believe we're on our second or third cohort there. It's just a little bit easier for some North American companies to participate. And then we're also doing our first accelerator in Singapore this year because we think the Asian market is really exciting. So we will find great companies wherever they are, and that overall probably means as in particular Asia and Europe become more dynamic new space ecosystems, will do more and more investment there as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think that from this last cohort on the accelerator, we had our first investment in Africa. Sorry, not our first member from Africa, which is really exciting. I think is that Amini, Zainab?
Yeah.
So Zainab, as Maureen mentioned, we've come a long way from the first Seraphim Space Accelerator. I think what cohort we're now on, our 12th cohort now. How has it developed in terms of companies that are looking to join the accelerator and the subspace sectors they specialize in? What's changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think with approaching a number like 100, there's bound to be companies that now have some overlap. And so what's that's resulting in is the newer cohorts that we're taking on, we definitely have to be a bit more selective, purely because we'll have seen companies in that sector sort of apply or go through the cohort before. And so there is a lot more scrutiny around competition, essentially. And so that means that the newer companies that are applying need to be definitely of a higher quality, because we'll have seen past attempts at certain products and technologies. And as I said before, the subsectors are definitely a lot more exciting and interesting. Where the earlier cohorts, it might have been maybe components businesses because that was novel. Now, because we've had 7 or 8 constellation businesses come on, you now need to be a little bit more adventurous, maybe in the technologies that they're trying to take on, rather than just having developed a novel sensor or something like that.
And what companies looking to join the accelerator? What does that say about the sectors that are growing at the fastest rate, in your opinion?
I think sort of Beyond Earth has been growing at the fastest rate for us, just because it was, as I said before, something that a lot of investors or even companies thought was really far out of scope for the next couple of years. But because we've got these essentially larger companies, like I mentioned before, Virtuous Solace, and sort of other larger infrastructure projects essentially that are coming on, and they're managing to raise quite a bit of investment. And so that's evolved fairly quickly.
Great, thank you. And everyone, we've had a few questions come in. If everyone wants to continue to post their questions, we can pick them up in a moment. I'll continue on with Zainab. How does Seraphim support the companies on the program with investment readiness and early stage deals in the accelerator?
There is, I'd say, a lot of pitch deck support and a lot of support around just the story that you're going to be telling to go out and fundraise. Understandably, a lot of founders have spent a lot of time working on the technology, and the sort of investing landscape requires a different sort of narrative. And so they get a lot of advice from the investment team here and other external investors on how to run a fundraising process and essentially tell the story in the best possible light of what their future plans are and what they've executed to date. On top of that is just essentially introducing you to the investor community. So the contacts that we've got in San Francisco, like Maureen said, now in Asia, and then the established ones that we have in Europe. So that's resulted in a lot of the investment community looking at space tech, whereas previously they didn't, just because they weren't aware of it, and then they also weren't sure of what a good space tech business looks like. So yeah, it's a lot of sort of educating the external market, and then also taking really talented founders and helping them tell a good fundraising story.
Great, thank you. I don't know if you want some related questions come in, Maureen. I don't know if you want to take maybe this one from Keith. What areas of the new space economy do you think is lacking the most at the moment?
Yeah, I'm going to take that as, what tech or what products are not available for the new space economy to redeliver. And probably that's a little bit reflective of underinvestment too. So I think that space data relay, basically the internet for space, whether that's doing on-orbit processing or ultimately helping Earth observation companies get their data down faster and turn it into more actionable insights faster. I think that's an area that really we haven't seen many solutions to, mostly probably because it's pretty capitally intensive and it's expensive to even get to first revenues. I think that's where the challenge has been. We've seen a number of players, for example, like SpaceLink, which went under trying to do that. And we recently saw investments in Kepler, who are effectively trying to do that, and they raised 90 million. So hopefully some of that data bottleneck will be alleviated. I think we have not had enough historically, but I really think this is starting to change. Product companies, again, companies that are building around Earth observation data. I think one of the key problems for Earth observation companies is that Earth observation data is actually really hard to work with, and you tend to need to be a geospatial expert, and therefore a lot of people don't use it, and they just use other more easy to access data streams. And that's bad for Earth observation companies because they don't have as many customers as they should as a result. What is happening now is that more people are taking the Earth observation data, packaging it into a product, and people never know there was any space data involved in that. So there's a lot of companies in Europe who are doing carbon credit verification. For example, they're using space data, but the end user, either banks or enterprise customers, never know that space data is involved. And I think that's just one example where we're going to see more and more of that.
Great, thank you, Maureen. Go back to my questions and we'll pick up a couple more from the audience in a bit. But Maureen, as the ex-CEO of a leading space company, what is the most difficult challenges in growing a space company that you found in terms of getting access to funding? And as a Seraphim investor now, what are you looking for when reviewing prospective space companies?
So as COO of Apollo, and what I see from most companies is getting to your first revenue is really, really hard. Space is better than many industries. We're really lucky. There are really large contracts awarded, and you can make high margins on them as well. The problem is because of really large contracts, it takes ages to close them. And for some, YC's advice is for a lot of companies is never operate in an industry where it takes you a long time to close a contract. So it is really hard. There's a huge chicken and egg problem because you need money to do your first space mission, and you probably can't get revenue without your first space mission. So that's trying to solve for that, and lots of companies are trying to solve for that. So I think that's important. And then, sorry, I just checked. Does someone is someone hearing kind of noise in the background, or is there something going on? Okay, yeah, whoever's muted, great. So I think that's a really big challenge. In terms of fundraising, what we see pretty consistently at the early stages, at later stages, people tend to have this ironed out, is too much focus on the tech. And I say this as an engineer, and I think a lot of engineers get really offended, or that means you're an investor, you don't understand the tech. And it's like, no, probably do. Most VCs are actually coming from a pretty technical background. But it's actually what you should be focusing on is the product. Your tech enables the product. And what do I mean is the difference between your product and your tech? MacBook is a product enabled by lots of really amazing technology developments at Apple on chip development, screens, manufacturing. So there's loads of amazing tech, but in general, Apple is not selling you a product based on that tech. They're selling you just a really great product that works and does exactly what you need it to do and solves your problems as a customer. And that's exactly the thing that you need to focus on when you're talking to your customers, and then articulating how you're solving those problems, which people are willing to spend money to solve, to your investors. And then after that, you say, like, actually, I've got this really huge tech moat with loads of patents. I've got the best tech team in the world, and my tech is way better. And that's why my product is so good. So focusing much more problem first and product first. And I think once you get that ironed out, I think actually fundraising becomes a lot easier.
Great, thank you, Maureen. And what about what specific companies at the moment that you're looking for to go into the portfolio? What are you looking for in particular in them?
Companies that have really thought about how they're going to commercialize their tech. When I say get to first revenues, I mean customers who have thought about how to demonstrate that they've got product market fit, and ideally that should be from some kind of revenues. Solving a hard problem with a large market, again, so they can generate large revenues, and having a strong technology moat. And again, just having a lot of conviction in the team that they can do these things that are really hard and that other people have probably tried to do, failed, but you've got a better team and therefore you're going to execute better.
Brilliant, thank you. What about are there any companies that you would like to, that are really exciting you at the moment from the 100 that you'd like to talk about or shed some light on?
Yeah, so I'm coming from the space industry, and one of the reasons that I joined Seraphim was because when I was looking at Seraphim's portfolio, there were lots of names I recognized, lots of names I respected, and they were really some of the strongest and most exciting companies in the industry. So I'm going to do a total cop out and mention a couple of the companies that I was like, wow, I'm like, they're good companies. They're the household names of space, and Seraphim's invested in them. So these are the ones that I was just really excited by when I was, thinking about joining Seraphim. So it's ISci, D-Orbit, Astroscale, Hawkeye 360, Leo Labs, Pixel, Spire, Tomorrow.io. So I think even if you don't know Seraphim, if you're working in the space industry, you know those names, you know those are successful companies and they're doing exciting things. So these are the household names of space, and Seraphim's very lucky to have invested in them.
Yeah, all the big names. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And at Seraphim, we always like to invest in visionary founders. We invest in people. Do either of you have a story you'd like to tell about, someone who really stood out, and what did they do and why?
Yeah, I just want to talk about our investment I made recently into Atmos. So they've changed their name from KST. Zainab mentioned them earlier in the call. But basically, I met the founders via cold call, and I was just, because the tech sounded interesting. They're a free fire and return company. They're doing re-entry technology. And I was literally blown away by the testing they had done whilst bootstrapped. It was
so you hadn't heard of them. They just called in.
They called in, and that happens a lot. Companies come into our deal flow and people say like, oh, that's actually really interesting. I want to take a call. So definitely you can get investment from Seraphim if you just call in. But, then I met them and I was quickly blown away. And then when I dug in a little bit more, found out that the CEO, he's actually, he's a paratrooper. He was a paratrooper in the German Air Force. He's an officer. He served in Afghanistan. And if you take a look at the video on my LinkedIn, you'll see why that's relevant, because actually their re-entry technology, which is their own patented technology. So they're doing a great product, free fire and returns, enabled by amazing technology with the technology moat. It's heavily inspired by parachutes, basically. So it's a good video, but it was a great founder.
Awesome, thank you. We've talked about the current Seraphim 100. What about the areas of the space ecosystem do you see dominating the next 100 companies as we look into the future? What are they, from investor interest, innovation, breakthrough, regulatory changes? What will we see next?
Zainab, you go first.
Yeah, I don't mind, whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I think I have a bit of background noise, so tell me if it gets too loud. But I think one of the things I'm really excited to see next is all the things we can just make in space and bring down, whether that comes from materials and fiber optics, or just on the healthcare side, and just things that can benefit humans, and find novel treatments to diseases and things like that. And so I think that'll help bridge the narrative around why investing in space can actually benefit people on Earth. And so I think that's starting to form, because the initial capital that was needed to set up an infrastructure in space is taking shape. And so now we can start to benefit from it.
Amazing, thank you. And Maureen?
So for me, I think you summarized a lot of the changes that have brought this about, Leah. So I'm really interested in narrowband communications, satellite direct to device. What's enabled that is that the 3 GPP standards, they're the standards that allows your mobile phone or your cell phone to operate across networks, to roam effectively. That sets everything from your device to your chip, to the software and firmware running on that. They've now actually changed their most recent rules to enable satellites to be cell tower in space, which means that ultimately we're tracking towards standard mobile phones can talk directly to satellites exactly the same way they do to a cell tower. Initially, with low data rate, text, WhatsApp requirements. So that's actually a lot of what we use our phones for, obviously. And there's lots of different solutions to do that. You can do that from LEO constellations. You can do that from LEO constellations. You can do it from geosatellites, and lots of different startups playing in that area to enable that.
Thank you. Someone said no sound. I don't know if people can't hear us or not. Let us know if you can't hear us. We're going to take a couple more questions. Maureen, I don't know if you want to take one of the questions from the audience about
the big infrastructure.
Beyond Earth.
Yeah, space stations. I don't think that anyone would have thought, 3 to 4 years ago, that there would be many players working on building their own space station, but through a combination of NASA deciding it doesn't want to do another ISS, it wants to contract from these services. They've put out bids, so now we have Axiom, and then in our own portfolio company we've got Voyager. There's Orbital Reef, so that's a huge one. There's robotic assembly coming online to facilitate some of those and other big infrastructure projects. but also huge category, and that's part of the reason why we invested in Atmos, are free flyer and returns, companies that are going to basically have satellites or vehicles operate autonomously in space and return to Earth. Everyone here will be familiar with Varda and their announcements, and obviously their attempts to return for Earth. So I think they're areas that have really taken off very quickly in a way that I don't think people expected it would be this quick.
Amazing. Thank you, Maureen. And if anyone's got any more questions, I think that's all we have time for, really. But if there's a couple more questions, we can take them from the audience. But there may not be any. But if not, that's all good. That means we've covered absolutely everything, so that's good. But also, if anyone wants to, this will be recorded and played on our LinkedIn channel. So if anyone wants to post any questions post live, we can go in and answer them for you. Actually, there's one more question. Lunar economy. Do you want to take that more before we say bye?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think just if you look at our in-space economy map, one of the really interesting areas is lunar economy and lunar activity. SpaceX, Blue Origin, Firefly, again, big household names in new space, are going after lunar missions. I think that's going to drive the cost of lunar launches down. There are some interesting ways that you can, do a GTO transfer to lunar as well. So I think that it's really going to come down. And then I think the next two things that will need to be developed are communications, really hard and expensive to communicate with the lunar environment, and then energy. And there's some really interesting startups in energy who have lunar applications, but also more terrestrial applications. But those will be the backbone infrastructures: cheap launch, energy, and communications, I think, before we see a lunar economy really take off. I think we're quite a bit further out from everything going on there. But, I literally just said that space stations and free flyers have taken off faster than would be expected. So we'll see.
Awesome. Thank you. And one more we'll take, and this is a huge question, but I think everyone else kind of asks us about it. The new space economy can appear to some people like the Wild West because it's lacking in kind of current regulation and policy. What's the plan going forward for that?
So just want to remind everyone, if you're a satellite that wants to communicate with the US, which is the vast majority of satellites, you essentially have to get permission to launch from the FCC in the US, who make you consider very carefully whether you're going to cause debris that's dangerous to anyone on Earth, or whether you're going to interact negatively with any debris. So basically, if you're going to be hit by debris, or if you have the potential to become debris yourself by being a non-functioning satellite. So that's actually really tightly controlled. And I actually would actually really disagree with this idea that it's unregulated. There's many arguments that it's too regulated, that it's actually harmful to startups, small startups launching constellations, or even just a few satellites. So I think it's a great that people are so interested, great that it's an area of debate, great that there's so much going on that people feel like it feels like booming and the Wild West, but it is actually a highly regulated area.
That's good to hear. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. And as I said earlier, we'll take more questions on the page and on the recording of this event. And thanks to everyone who's joined today. Thanks to Maureen and to Zainab, and thanks to our 100 Space Tech ecosystem for everything that they've done and to the future as well. We look forward to anyone seeing this and joining our alumni.